Hello, everybody. Hi, William.
Hi, Carrie. How's it going?
Good, good, good. How is everybody? I see everybody's checking in the chat. Lots of people from Germany and Canada. Well, today we're going to be going over some questions that were sent in, and if we can keep up with them, some of the questions that are in the chat. But thank you, everybody, for joining us for the ARC and William Brown question and answer series. So if you don't mind, William, I'm just going to go ahead and start. We get a lot of questions from everybody on a daily basis. And if we don't cover your question on this session, you could probably find the answer on our FAQ page, and that'll be arccrystals.com/FAQ. And there are a ton of frequently asked questions that are in there, and we get questions every day that are on that page. So if you don't get an answer from either William or I today, you could probably check that section and you'll probably find an answer. And if it's not in there, go to our blog. So one of the questions I get all the time, and I got it from Anne and Evelyn for this session, is does the ARC crystal need to be recharged? Does the ARC crystal ever wear out? And the answer is no, it doesn't need to be recharged. It's once it goes through with the HFR, it's modulated forever. So that's pretty exciting. So, but if you want to, you can always put it with other crystals, or you can put it out under the moon if you want to. But to answer your question, it's always modulated at the frequency that the HFR puts it through. Right?
And absolutely correct. Yeah. And that's actually in some of our own internal discussion on, how do we describe the functionality of the ARC crystal to be technically precise. We really wanted to avoid using actually that term charged.
Yeah.
It's a good, I think, descriptor with a layman kind of, just in relaxed everyday usage. You can say our crystal's charged up, but, at a technically precise level, charge is something that can be dissipated. In fact, something that's charged will dissipate that charge eventually. And so charged isn't exactly correct. And that's why you were saying it's been modulated.
Modulated, yeah. And that's why when William answers, we say modulated and not charged. But when we are reading your question, that's why we read it that way. And that's why it's written that way in our FAQ section and in our blog series.
Yeah. Because it's not, really like energy has been transferred into the ARC crystal, and now it's dissipating that energy into the water, into your system. It's really that it's been modulated in such a way that it's acting as a coupling, a link between the limitless energy source of space, what's technically called quantum vacuum energy fluctuations, and our macroscopic world, our body, water, other materials, and it's acting as like a gateway for energy flux. So it's not like a certain amount of charge, a certain amount of energy has been put in the crystal and now it's dissipating. It's kind of continually exchanging this energy.
Right. Thank you for explaining that better than I did. So it's kind of like a doorway now versus, say, a bucket.
Exactly. And that's kind of why it doesn't lose charge over time, as long as the ARC crystal isn't put in a strongly decohering environment. And from a physics perspective, a strongly decoherent environment would be something like high temperature, i.e. Extreme radiation, something that's going to disrupt it at the molecular level. it'll keep doing its thing indefinitely, acting as this intermediary, this exchange of energy / information.
Great. Do you want to go ahead and read one of your questions?
Yeah, sure.
I gave William a set of questions that only he can answer.
Well, yeah, and definitely, if you see a question come in that you'd like to jump on, let's take it.
Of course, yeah. I printed out the easier questions that I tend to do every day. That way, I know that I can answer them correctly. And I sent you all of the harder ones.
Well. Yeah. So, top of my list from Ashoka. After the crystals are made, they're exposed to a magnetic flux resonator. Can you please explain what this does?
So we kind of touched on that a minute ago.
Yeah, the modulation process. Again, in the interest of technical precision, that's why they have me on here. Give some of that technical precision, some of that science of the art crystals. It's not a magnetic flux resonator. The full name is a harmonic flux resonator, and it's an electromagnetic resonance generator. So not just the magnetic component of the field, but the electrical as well. So electromagnetic resonance generator. And it's given that appellation harmonic flux resonator because we're talking about resonance and resonant modes. And so, in terms of resonance, I think one of the easiest analogies, and the one we're probably all viscerally familiar with, is like music. So like a guitar, a piano, you're playing harmonies, harmonics. And when things are at a specific harmonics, A note, B note, C note, they sound good together. This function of resonance determines these very specific frequencies and their harmonic relationships. And actually, this particular electromagnetic resonance generator, the harmonic flux resonator, is engineered and built specifically for obtaining specific resonances, specific frequencies that are harmonics of each other. It's actually a fractal harmonic system that's set up. Now, these frequencies that we're talking about, now it's got the typical electrical frequencies associated with running what are called solenoid coils. They're not exactly solenoid coils, but I'm not an electrical engineer, so my technical precision on all the names of the components and gizmos and stuff is somewhat limited. But a solenoid is basically a coiled wire, and if you pass electrical current through it, especially a varying electrical current, it'll generate a magnetic field, and you can actually generate an electromagnetic field in this way. The harmonic flux resonator has that going on, but also it has a number of these coils placed along two hemispheres, the top hemisphere and the bottom hemisphere. And so you can get a frequency going on firing those sequentially around the hemispheres of the harmonic flux resonator. And you can generate a circular rotational frequency. Like the moon has a specific orbital frequency around the Earth. The Earth has a specific orbital frequency around the sun. And for example, the moon's orbital frequency is at a harmonic ratio with its rotational frequency. So you only ever see one face.
Right.
It's there's a resonance locking there. But so we can generate this circularly polarized electromagnetic field with the harmonic flux resonator. A circular electromagnetic field that is rotating with a very specific frequency. And because we're talking about electromagnetics or light, this can have a very, very high frequency. Light moves very fast. This is where it gets into some of the ideas of the quantum vacuum energy, what space is made out of, the fabric of space. What we know from advanced physics is that space is substantive. There's an energy to space. Now, Nassim and his colleagues like Dr. Olivier Olriol have gone even further and described the quantum nature of that energy of space, the vacuum energy. And they have described it as a plasma state. And one of the things about a plasma is that it responds to electromagnetic fields. So when the harmonic flux resonator is spinning this electromagnetic field at a very specific frequency with very specific harmonic ratios, it's building up resonance with the Planck vacuum plasma. This Planck plasma of the quantum vacuum. And this resonant coupling is going to cause the field to begin to spin with the harmonic flux resonator. This is so like the energetic structure of space is going to begin to spin. Now, I should say that the property of spin is ubiquitous. So actually what largely determines whether we experience something as solid or physical or empty in space happens to do with the coherency of the spin of space. Both have almost the same energetic content, empty space and where you have matter, because space has near infinite energy density. But when there is a coherent structure, a coherent spin in the space, we actually experience that as a particle, as something physical, because the spin generates a boundary condition, an event horizon, and all the Planck plasma harmonic oscillators in that region are all going to be correlated in their action, i.e. they're all experiencing the same torque, the same angular momentum. So you have a high coherence region of space. The harmonic flux resonator is one of the first technologies with the capability to induce this state in the field technologically. Wow. So you can, with future generations, future iterations of the technology, it should be possible to do some really phenomenal things with this resonant coupling to the energetic structure of space, because you can do things like energy generation, producing, actually pulling energy from that nearly limitless energy of space. If you can do that, you can also do things like changing the curvature of space. That's gravity control,
Okay.
gravitational
Mhm.
modulation. So our harmonic flux resonator is creating this highly coherent region of space. And the arc crystal has been specifically engineered to be at a dimensionality, that is the size of the arc crystal. There is a harmonic ratio of this frequency that the harmonic flux resonator is generating. So the intrinsic resonances of an object, any object, has to do with its material properties. But if it's a crystal, like the arc crystal, it has to do with its size. So a lot of engineering went into the specific dimensions of the arc crystal and getting a high level of precision on the geometry of the arc crystal, because that is going to determine its intrinsic resonances. And so in that way, it could be engineered on how strongly the arc crystals can couple to this highly coherent field that is being generated by the harmonic flux resonator. So you have these intrinsic resonances of the arc crystal. When they're placed in that field of the harmonic flux resonator, it is going to hit those notes, like plucking a string on a guitar. The resonances are very specifically set, and the harmonic flux resonator has the right frequency, the right resonances to pluck those notes. And in a very real sense, the crystalline lattice, so we're talking about at the atomic molecular level of the material of the crystal, is going to oscillate. It's going to resonate, vibrate. Now, the arc crystal is a particularly special material when it comes to the properties of the things that we interact with. And that, the organization of matter that we call crystalline, crystal, is no trivial matter. That this is a significant arrangement of matter. If you were to consider it compared to a non-crystalline material, where the molecular organization is more random, it's actually symmetrical because everything is randomly orientated, more or less. And so actually it's mostly symmetrical. There's no like one direction, because if one molecule is pointing this way, another one's pointing this way, and it's kind of all cancels out. But when you get a periodic organization, atomic ordering, like that we call, the state that we call a crystal, you get very unique, non-trivial properties, material properties of matter. And the arc crystal, for instance, has a property that is produced by this crystalline arrangement called piezoelectricity. It has a electromechanical axis that has to do with the symmetry breaking of the atomic order. And so when the crystalline lattice starts to oscillate, starts to vibrate, start to have these acoustic modes. Remember, we're talking like plucking a guitar string, hitting a note on a piano key.
Right.
It's getting a very specific frequency of vibration, very specific resonance. That mechanical oscillation, acoustic oscillation, actually starts to generate electrical currents. And if we can modulate or alternate these vibrations of the crystalline lattice, which the harmonic flux resonance achieves, you can generate varying electrodynamic fields in the crystalline lattice, which is going to generate a very patterned, specific electromagnetic field of the arc crystal. And so this is, now we're getting into the theory of how the arc crystal works, scientifically speaking.
Right. easy to understand. No, but I appreciate, I think everyone appreciates your explanation of what it is that the harmonics flux resonator does to the arc crystal and how it does it. It's really complicated, but at the same time you're able to break it down quite well so that so that the rest of us can understand it.
And I mean, probably one of the few people that fully understands what is happening is the inventor, Nassim Haramein. So, even for me, a lot of it is more theoretical. I mean, we have done testing and experimentation. I've been involved with a good degree of this characterization. So, we have tested some of these ideas to see that, okay, this is what we believe is happening, and we have seen indications that that is indeed correct. So again, even my explanation probably isn't as technically precise as what we can get from like the inventor, but it's still, I think, close enough that the folks can understand how the harmonic flux resonator is working and how we're modulating the arc crystals.
Right. Well, thank you. Now I'm going to answer an easy question. We've gone from quantum vacuum to magnets. So I was asked, let me see. Oh, hello, this is from Connie. Hello, I'm planning on buying an arc crystal in the pendant. Will I be able to charge my water while the crystal is still in the pendant, or should I remove it? So Connie, I chose your question because I get this all the time and it's actually very helpful for me. That's why I'm not wearing the crystal right now. I wanted to show you this. So when I structure the water, like we were saying, we don't like to use the word charge because it's not we're not like taking energy from one place and moving it into, or emptying it into another place. We're as a doorway moving it through. So when I structure water, I tend to keep it in my pendant, like you were asking. So the arc crystal fits inside the pendant that we have here. And if you want to take the arc crystal out, you just press right here on the top and the arc crystal pops out. There are magnets around, this is the saddle, the metal saddle that surrounds the arc crystal, which is this right here. And then there are magnets inside the pendant as well. And so that's how the arc crystal goes in and out of the pendant. So if you're going to structure water, you could do it either way. You could either put the arc crystal by itself underneath your container of water with the arrows pointing up within 6 centimeters of the liquid that you are influencing. But I like to keep it in my pendant because I tend to knock things off of my counter. And having it in the pendant makes it more difficult to move the crystal around. So the crystal or the pendant is heavier than the crystal by itself, and it's more substantial, so that if I go looking for my crystal, I know I can see it easier. And when it's in the pendant, it's less likely that I'm going to lose it. So it's not going to change how the water is structured if you're leaving it in your pendant. Some people just like to take it out. I like to leave it in. So that's what it is. And that also helps answer the question. It's 6 centimeters from the arc crystal that is directly influenced by the arc crystal. So I hope that helps Connie and everybody else that asked what's the resonance area of the arc crystal is 6 centimeters. So that's 2 questions in one. I hope that helps. And that's also why I wasn't wearing my crystal at the beginning, because I wanted to be able to show you how to put it in and take it out. We do have a little video on YouTube on how to remove the arc from your pendant and how to put it back in. If you ever wonder how to do that again, that's how you do it. You simply push it. And sometimes it needs a little extra oomph, but don't worry, it'll move. That was completely different from your question, William. It was we went from the quantum vacuum to magnets, so it's a little different, but useful.
And it's all connected. You can draw some connections directly from the quantum vacuum to what the magnets are doing with our crystal technology. And
but those are actually 2 questions. Those are 2 questions I get a lot, and it's so funny because I probably get them about the same amount of time as what does the HFR do, and can I take the arc crystal out of the pendant. And so it's good that we're actually answering questions on all sorts of different levels for everybody. Okay, William, now that I answered questions about the field of influence for the arc crystal, and you did the HFR, you get to do another fun one. So
right on. Excellent. So this is from Susan, and this is a fun one because we're going to be talking about water now. Well, and I guess so it's a good parallel to what you were just describing. Okay,
because they go hand in hand. Yep. We're always asked about water when it comes to the arc.
So besides structuring water in and out of the body, what else can the arc crystal serve with health and well-being? And so the effects that the arc crystal has on water is one of the most prominent and significant effects. It's also one of the easiest to understand, and also actually to test and characterize experimentally. You can put the arc crystal with some water, give the water to growing plants, compare that to control getting normal water or even tap water, and pretty easily see the difference in the effect. But the effect isn't just limited to what is occurring in the water, because what's occurring in the water, that's a specific example of the general effect of the arc crystal. And probably the most simple way to explain that is the increased coherence that the arc crystal imparts to materials brought into its sphere of influence. So it's like the harmonic flux resonator that is generating a high coherent domain in the field, a highly coherent dynamic and structure in the field. The arc crystals carry a little piece of that harmonic flux resonator, that highly coherent organization of the field. They become like a little fractal, holographic fractal part of that dynamic. And now they're carrying it with them. And like a chain of influence, when you bring materials into now the arc crystal's coherent domain within the field, it'll begin to impart that coherence to those materials, especially if they are responsive to this kind of electrodynamic activity, this responsive to energy and information exchanges, especially via the electromagnetic field. Water is a perfect example of a material that is responsive to this kind of exchange. So when water is brought into that field of influence of the arc crystal, that coherent field, the molecules of the water begin to align, in very specific ordering, organizational patterning. It becomes liquid crystalline.
Right.
Again, that non-trivial organization of matter. When matter is organized or beginning to organize in a crystalline fashion, it has significant properties, especially in terms of when we're thinking about it from a physics and energetic type perspective. But so since this isn't an effect that is specific only to the arc crystal interaction with water, we believe that this effect is much more general. There are probably a great number of different kind of materials that can benefit from being brought into the field of interaction with the arc crystal. Now, the body has many molecules, biomacromolecular assemblies that it's comprised of that are remarkably responsive to this kind of field, this coherent field produced by the arc crystal. The molecular arrangements that comprise the cell, the arrangements of the cells that comprise the tissues that make up the body, these are all involved in this constitutive, continuous exchange of energy and information. This exchange that's occurring, let's say, at the molecular level of the cell, is to a large degree being done via resonances, electromagnetic resonance. Many of the molecules involved in this energy exchange within the cell have what are called dipole moments. Now, this is what makes water so responsive to the arc crystal, is that it has a constitutive partial dipole moment. You've got H2O, you got that oxygen and two protons, two hydrogen molecules. Those hydrogen molecules on the oxygen, they're not attached like linearly to that central oxygen. They're actually offset.
Right.
And it forms like I think it's 104.5 degree angle, something around there. And so actually the water molecule has a tetrahedral geometry, just like the arc crystal. But that slight, that angle of the bonding, oxygen-hydrogen bonding pair gives water a partial dipole moment. So that dipole is what is able to form a resonant interaction. The same thing occurs in many biomolecules within the cell. They have these dipole moments that allow them to interact very strongly with the water. This is one of the reasons why the state of the water in the body is so important, because it acts as an intermediary in many of these resonant interactions, this coupling of orchestration at the molecular level within the cell. The arc crystal can augment and boost this effect as well. So the resonances that are involved in the energy information exchanges at the cellular level can be boosted, facilitated by the coherent field of the arc crystal. This is one of the things that we believe is occurring. So a result of that kind of interaction would be greater flow of bioenergy in the body. So you can use the ARC crystals to enhance or facilitate the channels, the conduits of bioenergy exchange and flow within the body. Some of these conduits, some of these channels are quite pronounced and distinct, and they form like the meridians of the
Right.
acupuncture.
Right.
Those are
And we
like,
actually just, yeah, we discussed that in our ebook about meridian therapy, using the arc crystal on specific meridian points.
Yeah. So besides structure and water, what else can the arc crystal serve with health and well-being? I believe that a very potentially significant use of the arc crystal is in enhancing the flow of this bioenergy throughout the body, and where the bioenergy is flowing, where you're having the highest degree of this exchange of bioenergy, that is a healthy state of the body. Where you have blockages or places where the bioenergy is not able to flow as efficiently, as effectively, that's where you start to get diseased state of the body, injured state of the body, those kind of conditions that we don't want to have our body experiencing. There's that aspect of the effects of the arc crystals that I think are really exciting and a great utilization of the technology. But then just if you're in a larger outcome of that kind of increasing the resonant coupling of molecular interactions in the cellular environment, the whole system is operating in a more coherent manner at a higher level. So things that need to happen at a specific place, at a specific time, within the cell, within the cellular organization of tissues and within the body, it's the orchestration of those events are going to take place with a lot more optimal frequency. This is almost like, for me, that's nearly synonymous with like an anti-aging effect. If you can maintain optimal coherence of the body, the energy and information exchanges at the molecular and cellular level.
Right. And, we had a human study, a pilot human study done a little while ago. And if anybody is interested in learning more about the effects of people that wore the arc crystal and drank structured water for 42 days versus placebo, you can read all about that in the human study ebook as well. So it wasn't just working with water like we normally say, but people were actually wearing the arc crystal throughout the day, and then they were drinking the structured water in the morning. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can download that ebook as well. So there's ebooks on the meridian therapy, but there's also an ebook about the human study of people wearing the arc crystal and drinking the structured water throughout the day, if you're interested. But it helps show some of the positive effects of what happens when you integrate this into your daily life.
Yeah, and the effects with water, I think, are just kind of the easiest and most direct effects to understand. And it's like real physical effects, but I really believe that there are many, maybe perhaps more subtle effects that accompany that are as important as what kind of effects we've seen and documented with water. Many let's say subtle energy type effects.
Right. I liken it to the effects of the wind. You don't see the wind itself, but you get to see how the wind affects everything around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that one. Did you want to go ahead and answer another question, William? Mine are pretty much answered.
Oh,
So,
really? Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Sure.
mine, like I said, and the more simple questions are always on our FAQ page. So if you go to arccrystals.com/FAQ, you should be able to find what you're looking for there. Let me answer a quick question real quick. I did talk to our engineers this morning before when I was setting up for everything, because I wanted to be able to address some questions that I get on a daily basis about new pendants and is anything going on with that. So because everybody keeps asking about, is a new pendant coming out? I guess it was a while ago now, you saw William and I wearing some other pendants. If you go back to our Wellness Week interview, where we actually also talked about coupling and vacuum and being able to speak without making phone calls. And so if you're interested in that, go ahead and watch that video from Wellness Week earlier this year. But he and I are wearing other pendants other than the ones that we're wearing right now. And they're a little lighter. And I got word today that those should be available, I would say September. That's what we're aiming for. But if you're part of the newsletter, yes, we'll announce it there first. But because people have been asking about the new lighter pendants and other products coming out, that should be coming out, I would say September at the earliest. So, but if you're part of the newsletter, you will be one of the first to find out about it. I love the lighter pendant. I like this one too. Like I said, I tend to knock things around, and and having the larger pendant makes it easier for me to keep things where they belong. But the new pendant should be coming out probably around September. Also, we have a sleeve that will be available for the water bottle. And hopefully that'll be coming out at the end of summer, the beginning of fall. So not too long, but they were letting me know, like I asked if I could speak about them today on the phone call, and they said that it would be okay to mention both of those. So hopefully I'm shooting for September, but like I said, they'll be notified in the newsletter first when they're available. So if you want to be the first to know, please sign up for the newsletter, and everything will be announced there first.
Wow, that's fantastic news.
I was very excited. I was kind of hopping around my room. I was like, no, really, let me know for sure if I can talk about this. They're like, yes, you can actually talk about these. And we are working on something else that everybody has been asking about, kind of in the field of the tetrahelix. So please stay tuned for that. I can't let too much out of the bag about it, but it's related to the tetrahelix, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But as we get closer and closer to it, I'll be able to speak more on it. Kind of a teaser there for you. So you have to keep coming back for it.
There is more in the works, though.
Yes, we do. We are actually working on a myriad of things, and we want to share everything with everybody. But the truth is, some things work out and some things don't, and we never want people to be, disappointed or upset because something didn't come to market. So that's why we can't tell you everything that we're working on, because sometimes it just doesn't work out.
And just for folks who might not be entirely familiar, the tetrahelix is a very specific geometry that the arc crystal, the tetrahedral geometry, the arc crystal can adopt. It has the arc crystal, the tetrahedron has several higher order geometrical configurations when you bring more and more of them together. And that's actually a really exciting and interesting way to experience the arc crystal is getting many of them together and putting them into these higher order geometrical configurations. And one of those is called a tetrahelix, a Coxeter helix. And that's actually, if you begin to align the tetrahedra face to face in a linear sequence, it actually starts to form a helix.
Like half of a DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a spiral. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the ratio of the number of units to achieve a full, nearly a complete 360-degree spiral. It's not complete. It's something like 356.5 degrees, because you actually have to go a long ways before you get like a full 360-degree turn, if I'm remembering that correctly. But the number of units to the turn of the tetrahelix is the same as that of the DNA. So actually, in both those instances, it is a phi ratio, a golden ratio. So it's a very interesting geometrical aspect of this configuration. But one of the technologies that we've been engineering and experimenting with is the arc crystals in this helical arrangement geometry. Because
and what it does is water goes around it as through like an especially for agriculture, like it would be forced over these arc crystals in order to structure water at a higher rate. And so it's something that we were looking at for like whole house and or agricultural uses.
Yeah, and part of the reasoning behind that is just that when you get these higher order geometrical configurations, the effects are non-linear. It's not purely additive,
right?
So it's like if one
it's
crystal,
not 1 + 1. It's
exactly.
It's more.
It's geometrical. Yeah, so it's like it's not like 2 + 2. It's like 2 raised to like a power of like 3 or 4, so like an exponential non-linear increase in the effect. So if you have a tetrahelix, there's a good possibility that when you're treating water, you could treat the water in your entire house.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're working on something that works on a smaller scale, mm-hmm. but like I said, we want to tell you all about it, and we will eventually, but I just wanted to let you know that it is something that we're working on.
Well, and just that clamp, that's really exciting that it's going to be finally made available. I really love that particular way to wear the arc crystal, just because to me the arc crystal itself is so beautiful. I kind of want to show it off,
right?
Only no pendant or anything, just the
right.
So crystal.
So what William is talking about is the new pendant, and it's ultra light, and it's just this little clasp, like this little hand that holds on to the top of it, and so you just get to see the beauty of the arc crystal basically kind of floating there. And so, like I said, if you go to our video from Wellness Week earlier this year, William and I are both wearing prototypes that led to the version that's being crafted as we speak. So that will be available soon, and it is beautiful. And I had a lot of questions regarding that one, and I kept saying, when it's ready, I'll let you know when it's ready. We were literally wearing a prototype just to make sure it didn't fall off in the middle of the day. So that's why you'll see us wearing pendants that aren't quite ready for, like, that aren't on the website yet. It's because a lot of times we're the guinea pigs that get to
we're doing the beta testing.
Yeah, we're doing the beta testing for everybody so that you get the best quality product. So you're not wearing it one day and it just kind of falls off. We don't want that to happen. Okay, William, it's your turn again. Although you answered a great question about what the tetrahelix is. So
Well,
if you,
so the next question I have builds right on that because
okay,
talking about these higher order geometrical configurations. And actually, I think I saw it passed in the chat. Somebody was asking what
about how
are.
to find out how to make them. Yeah, if
Yeah,
you
yeah, right.
go, yeah, if you can, we have a couple things. There's if you just go on the product section of the Art Crystal, it actually shows some of the different arrangements. We have the single and the 5, and then there's the 8 and the 20 and the 64. So you can see those, and they all have links to videos. But also, if you go to the blog, I know that we have the 5 and the 8, and there's one about the 512 as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Which was fun.
There's the information on some of the higher order geometrical configurations. There's really no limit to how many art crystals you can bring together into larger and larger geometries, but definitely some of the most accessible and popular are like the what I call 8 matrix configuration. So that's bringing together 8 art crystals, and it forms a new geometry when you bring them together like this, because we started with a tetrahedral geometry, and now we have cuboctahedron here, and this is what is called a gravitative orientation, because there's some chirality to how the art crystals in these higher order geometrical configurations can be arranged. It's not just in one particular configuration. This could also be, you can also bring 8 of them together in a more radiative configuration. So here, the vertices are all pointing away from the center with the same matrix. And I got to be a little bit more careful handling this one because it doesn't have the.
There's no frame.
It doesn't have the chasis, the
Yeah.
frame. I have one with the star tetrahedron frame. I'm not sure where it got off to, but so 8 art crystals brought together, and now we have a star tetrahedron, a stella octangula. And so that is more of a radiative configuration, a stellated configuration, because the vertices are pointing away from the center, whereas with our cuboctahedral 8 matrix configuration, the vertices are all pointing to the center. Mm-hmm. So gravitative versus radiative. And again, this is another really cool way to experience the art crystal. You can do experimentation or play with, if you have 8 art crystals, with gravitative and radiative configurations. And that was one of the questions we got from Annie. Could you explain the difference between the radiative and gravitative configurations?
And we have a brand new blog up on the blog section of the website, and it's basically everything that you've ever written me about what the difference is between gravitative versus radiative. And I use the 8 as the example because that's the one that is more accessible most of the time. It's what I'm building when I do some of our social media posts and stuff. I'll do an 8 versus doing a 64, so it's easier to explain when talking about an 8. Yeah, but if you want to get more details about it, please go to artcrystals.com/blog, and it's like the second blog post. It's all about gravitative versus radiative. What's the difference? So
I know I've written some good things about it, so we'll
Well,
see. We'll see how well I can
I,
remember what I wrote.
I took a lot of what you've said in all sorts of it, whether it's kind of a metaphysical or whether it's energetic, kind of explaining what the difference is between the in versus the out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very useful. And, and we do that the same, with, like you were saying earlier, when it comes to the meridian points, the person that wrote it suggested sometimes having it be more outward versus inward, like having the arrows point in or out. So it kind of goes along the same lines.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, and so the question also asked, is one of the configurations better for charging water? If so, when should you use that configuration? And so we've already kind of mentioned quite a bit about the difference between the two. I mean, certainly in terms of the geometry that if you look at your Arc Crystal close up, you can see the triangle there demarcating one of the vertices, and that's a very specific, special orientation of the Arc Crystal, and that axis is the optical axis of the quartz crystal. Perpendicular to that, so if we think of that as the z-axis, z-axis, perpendicular to that, let's say the x-axis, you have the electromechanical axis. That is the piezoelectric the piezoelectrically active axis of the Arc Crystal. So that's the axis that if you squeeze the Arc Crystal, if you actually introduce oscillations to the crystalline lattice, it generates an electrical current. That forms the basis of many technologies. Amplifying devices like microphones, speakers, even like the time logic gate and the CPU, central processing unit of the computer, uses the electromechanical axis of the Arc Crystal to run. Atomic clocks use the frequency of crystalline oscillations of quartz crystal to run, and some of those are accurate within 1 second in 4 billion years. That's their duration. So non-trivial properties of crystalline materials. But so you've got that optical axis demarcated with that triangle, and so if you have them all those triangles pointing away from the center, you have that radiative configuration. If you have all those optically active axes pointing into the center, you have your gravitative. And you can also, while you're doing that orientation, align the electromechanical axis of the crystals so that they start to line up. And so now you can get a real synchronization of function of all the Arc crystals. And, just one of the key things about this is that, we believe that this kind of configuration, higher order geometry of the Arc crystal is going to have a large degree of synergetic interaction, and that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we touched on that a little bit, that it's not additive linearly. It's like raising it to an exponent. It's exponential, geometric, the increase in the effect. Now, so both configurations are going to structure the field, create coherence in the field. They have the same underlying dynamic, the way that they're interacting with those Planck plasma particles that are the energetic harmonic oscillations of space, the structure of space itself. And so both of them, both orientations can be used equally well for the coherence in the field that they're going to generate. But there is a division, a disparity in applications in some narrow senses. Like, for instance, is one of the orientations better to potentiate water than the other? Personally, well, and even I guess from a technical standpoint, the radiative configuration is going to be better at projecting into a material, so you've got that coherent field. This is perhaps going to be a little bit more on the radiative side, so imparting that coherence to the water via energy exchange. Both of them have the dynamic of energy flux, energy going out, energy going in, but this is perhaps a little bit more on the radiative side of that flux dynamic. So I would expect it to have a slightly, if anything, more rapid onset of effect on water, if not a greater effect. Now, let's say, though, that I'm wanting to do a meditation with the 8 matrix, either in the room or maybe even holding it while doing a meditation. Probably the gravitative is going to be a better choice, a better configuration, because you can kind of think of it as, okay, in one instance, trying to enhance that energy exchange from the field, right? The quantum vacuum, that this field that connects all things, that limitless energy and all information, that info dynamic field. I'm trying to get an exchange from it into materials, but in some instances, you're trying to get an exchange into the field, perhaps to get like optimal manifestation of intentions, or maybe in a more Buddhist sense, just to promote a general sense of well-being and equanimity amongst all living beings. I think that's a very great,
more of a balancing versus turning the volume up to 11.
Yeah. So the gravitative configuration is probably great for that. And I think that for each person, it would be a fun way to experience arc crystals. So just seeing, well, when I potentiate water with the gravitative configuration, what experience do I have of that water under those conditions? And since we're each unique, and some of our responses are going to be unique to our constitution, you might find that a gravitative configuration affects you like much more than a radiative, like in terms of potentiating water.
Right. And just because, and that's a good statement as well, because just because it's not pointing, the arrows aren't pointing at whatever it is, doesn't mean that the field is not affecting something. So that's good to remember too, is that just because the arrows aren't direct, may not be direct towards something, there is still a field of experience that's around it.
Yeah. Because you can get some like collimated type beam-like effect from the arc of crystals, but even under those conditions, it's still generating a volume of space, increasing the coherence in that volume, even if there is like a collimated beam. I've images flashing of pulsars out of space, because even black holes, because they'll have like an accretion disk along the equator. So they have this sphere of influence. Then at the poles, they also have these like collimated beams. So
Right.
even if you are getting some of that like beam-like activity, it's
Mm-hmm.
also generating coherent space in the
Right.
volume.
Was it a toroidal as
Yeah,
well?
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's the direct, but there's also the all
Mhm.
around. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If you look at some of the uh, space-time diagrams for how this polarized flow of the Planck plasma is occurring, that Nassim Haramein and his colleagues have generated. They've got like a double torus dynamic, which is like two tori
Mm-hmm.
forming two hemispheres. This is exactly how the harmonic flux resonator is oriented. And then like along the equator, you have energy outflow from that singularity point at the nexus of those two tori. Then you've got poles with energy coming in,
Right.
like collimated beams. Yeah.
It's super simple. But when you explain it, it makes it, it's just too, yeah, it's too torrid. But yeah, it's constant, and it's all flowing, and it's all around, and it is pretty interesting to try it out in different directions on whether you're holding it or you put it on something or you put it near your water. So it's something that we always suggest that everybody kind of finds their own rhythm with.
Yeah, because I think that many of the experiences, the effects of the art crystal, have a high degree of variability, specificity to each person. I think that it's one of those uh, um, technologies where the effects are very specific to the particular person and how they're using it and what intentions and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I get emails all the time from people asking me if it's normal for them to have certain experiences, and the truth is, with every person, and even in different times of your life, it can influence you differently.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so if you're having a hard time, like when you first get it's kind of overwhelming, just wear it for a little while, and then drink the water, and then sometimes maybe later on, you can wear it for longer periods, or it could always come back around too. So just listen to your body and your experiences, and kind of just go with it. Yeah, don't force anything.
Yeah. That was very much my experience when I first started using them. Is I was in need of some realignment energetically within the body, and so actually I needed to do kind of like a gradual exposure to them, so that the correct
Yeah.
energy flows were occurring more gradually and at a pace that was very harmonic with my body. So, uh, uh,
Yeah, me too. When I first started wearing it, it was overwhelming, and I got a really bad headache, and I also started putting it in my pocket
oh,
when I wasn't wearing it, because it sits right over certain chakra points, and I was like, I can't, and so I would just put it in my pocket just to kind of have it with me, and then when it wasn't in my pocket, I'd have it structuring water throughout the day, just so that I could get used to even having it near me, and I was also sitting right next to the room that housed all of the art crystals all the
oh,
time.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so when I first became, exposed to art crystals, it was all of them all at once. So it was a little overwhelming. So having another one placed directly on my body just kind of, I think, sent everything over the edge. It was like, okay, I'm in the room next to 1,000 of them. I think I can just handle the water for a little bit. So like we're saying, like your experience with the art crystal and the directions that you wear it, and how long you wear it is very unique to you. So just listen to your body, and don't force it. So if it's uncomfortable, realize that it's uncomfortable and kind of work with it. So, okay, William, do you have any other questions? Because, we've I know we could probably do 29 more.
Yeah, we could probably keep going all day. I might just address one that I saw in the chat. Just I'll make a comment on it just real quick.
Okay.
On sitting in the room with the harmonic flex resonator, the HFR. So I have had the fantastic opportunity to experience this on more than a couple of occasions. And it is just a visceral experience is the word I use this, that you can I could tangibly feel the energy in the room. Like the crown of my head, the top of my head starts like vibrating and oscillating, and along those kind of lines of tangible physical experiences. But it was just asked, to get direct effects of its resonance on crystalline structures in the body. And, it was pointed out like the pineal gland,
right,
that has literal microcrystals along it, which are undoubtedly involved in resonances, energetic resonances and information exchange that's occurring with the brain and the pineal gland. But I was just going to make a comment that many of the structures of the body, many of the molecules, the biomolecules of the body, are paracrystalline or quasi-crystalline in nature. So even structures of the cell that you wouldn't naively perhaps think of as being crystalline do have crystalline phases. The plasma membrane can have a high degree of phase orientation of the molecules that make up the cellular membrane. In fact, it forms highly ordered paracrystalline domains that's part of the cellular regulation and communication and energy exchange of the cell. The DNA molecule is quasi-crystalline molecule. Many of the proteins, the enzymes, they can be crystallized. So if you were to, and this is how many of them are studied, is that you get a large number of them extracted from the cells, bring them together, and they will begin to crystallize. And then you can do what's called like X-ray crystallography on many of these proteins that are, the functional units of the cell, the structural units of the cell. So your body is, let's say conservatively, it's paracrystalline. I mean, it's a crystalline structure. So it's like, when we're talking about crystal technology and its effects, its non-trivial effects, it's not commonly thought of. Organic matter isn't really commonly thought of as having crystalline structure or
right,
having electromagnetic resonance communication and coupling, but it does, and it is. So
yeah,
it's like, and so that's kind of why this is a bit of the technology of the future, and perhaps why it's not widely understood as of yet. But I think that's going to change, especially as we bring more of these resonance-based technologies into play, because you can have beneficial optimization and effects of the body by going to that root level of resonance, of frequency matching, coupling, and interaction. And I think that this is a wonderful iteration of that kind of technology that's going to be, that is doing that, and that will be more so even in the future.
Right. And Luli, I see your question about how the fact you haven't felt it before. Don't worry about it. During our human study, even people who didn't feel anything still showed benefits from wearing the Art Crystal and drinking the water. So even though they reported not thinking anything was changing or anything was working or they didn't feel anything, they still actually had they had marked changes in their well-being. So don't worry if you're not feeling anything. Like we said, everybody is different, so don't worry about it. Okay, well, I want to thank William for joining us. I know he's super busy all the time.
Oh yeah.
But we appreciate all the time that he gives us, and for taking, and for all of you for joining us today. We know that you know, we are grateful that you all join us and send us your questions. And like I said, if we didn't get to your question, you can always go to artcrystals.com/FAQ. And a lot of the questions are answered there. You could go to our blog. And then also we have ebooks for the download that deal with the science, the water, the human study, and the meridians with art crystals. So once again, thank you, William.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Great. Thank you. And we'll see you next time, and sign up for the newsletter so you can stay up to date on everything that will be coming our way. Okay. Thank you, William. Bye.